The story of the B-29 engine is not just a chapter of World War II history. It is a lesson about human limits and what happens when a nation refuses to accept them. At its core, this story teaches that progress is rarely born from comfort or certainty. The Wright R3350 engine was not welcomed with confidence. It was feared, doubted, and often hated by the very people forced to work with it. Experts called it impossible. Engineers warned it would fail. Early results proved them right. Fires, crashes, and deaths made the cost of ambition painfully clear. The moral here is simple but uncomfortable. Truly transformative ideas almost always look reckless at first. Another powerful lesson is that failure is not the opposite of success. It is its raw material. Every burned engine, every cracked cylinder, and every lost aircraft became data. Instead of hiding mistakes, America exposed them, studied them, and forced industry to learn from them at scale. The moral is not that mistakes should be celebrated, but that ignoring them is fatal. Progress only began when failure was treated as information, rather than embarrassment. The story also reveals the power of commitment. Once the United States chose the B-29, retreat was no longer an option. Canceling the program would have been safer in the short term, but disastrous in the long term. This teaches that half commitment is often more dangerous than full risk. Great outcomes demand full responsibility financially, intellectually, and morally. When America committed completely, it was forced to invent new methods, new materials, and new systems of quality that reshaped the modern world. Equally important is the human lesson behind the machines. The engine did not improve because of genius alone. It improved because ordinary workers, mechanics, and engineers were trusted to stop production, question authority, and insist on precision. The moral here is that systems improve when people on the ground are empowered, not silenced. Progress came not from orders alone, but from millions of small, disciplined decisions made by individuals who understood the cost of being wrong. There is also a darker moral. The same engine that symbolized innovation carried unimaginable destruction. The story reminds us that technology itself is neutral. Its morality is defined by how and why it is used. Human brilliance can save lives or end them. Responsibility does not end with invention. It begins there. Finally, the deepest lesson is about courage, not battlefield courage, but intellectual courage. The courage to attempt what seems impossible. The courage to endure criticism. The courage to fail publicly and try again. The B-29 engine changed World War II not because it was perfect, but because people refused to quit on it. The moral of this story is clear. History is not shaped by those who avoid risk, but by those willing to face its cost and learn faster than time itself. The engine that ended the war B-1944, the B-29, was no longer an experiment. It was a force. The Wright R3350 engine, once dismissed as a death trap, had crossed a critical line. It was not flawless, it never would be, but it was now reliable, enough to do what no other engine on Earth could do: lift a massive bomber across oceans, through jet stream winds, and back again mission after mission. The war entered a new phase. From newly captured islands in the Marianas, American planners finally had what they needed: runways long enough, supply lines secure enough, and an aircraft capable of reaching Japan itself. The B-29 was not just flying farther than any bomber before it. It was flying into a new kind of war. At first, strategy followed tradition: high altitude, daylight precision bombing. The engines strained as they climbed into thin air. Jet streams battered aircraft unpredictably. Bomb accuracy suffered. But the R3350 revealed something unexpected. At lower altitudes, with careful throttle management, the engines ran cooler, more stable, more predictable. And so doctrine changed. In March 1945, B-29s descended into the night skies over Tokyo. Their engines roared at low altitude, pushing enormous bomb loads of incendiaries. The result was devastation on a scale never before seen. Firestorms consumed entire districts. Industrial capacity collapsed. Japanese air defenses designed for high-altitude threats were overwhelmed. The engine made this possible. Without the sustained power and endurance of the R3350, these missions could not exist. No other aircraft could carry such payloads so far, so frequently. But the engine's ultimate test was still ahead. Deep inside America's most secret program, engineers faced a terrifying equation. A single aircraft would need to carry a weapon heavier than anything ever dropped from the sky. The plane would have one chance. The engine would have no margin for failure. The atomic bomb missions demanded perfection. On August 6, 1945, A B-29 named Enola Gay lifted from Tinian Island. Its engines were carefully selected, inspected, and tested beyond standard limits. Every vibration was monitored, every temperature logged. As the aircraft climbed, the engines held. Across thousands of miles, they held. Over Hiroshima, they held. And when the bomb detonated, rewriting history in a blinding flash, the engines carried the aircraft safely away from the shockwave something planners had feared might tear the plane apart. 3 days later, another B-29 repeated the mission over Nagasaki. Again, the engines held. The war ended not just because of a bomb but because an engine carried it there. Yet the true legacy of the R-3350 was not destruction. It was transformation. After the war, engineers around the world studied the B-29 and its engines in disbelief. Pressurization systems, cooling solutions, fire suppression, manufacturing discipline, quality control. The lessons reshaped aviation. Civil airliners inherited pressurized cabins. Engine reliability standards skyrocketed. Metallurgy advanced by decades. Statistical process control once radical became standard. Even jet engines owe a debt to the R-3350. The problems it forced engineers to solve: heat, airflow, materials under stress became foundational knowledge for the jet age. Ironically, the engine once considered a failure became one of the most influential machines ever built. But it came at a cost. Hundreds of airmen died in training accidents and early missions. Mechanics worked around the clock under brutal conditions. Entire cities near factories lived under constant risk of industrial fire and explosion. This was not a clean triumph. It was a desperate race between engineering and time. And America won by refusing to retreat. Where others saw limits, American industry saw problems to be solved by scale, by iteration, by relentless pressure. The B-29 engine was never elegant. It was powerful, dangerous, unforgiving, and it changed the world. When the last superfortresses were retired, the R-3350 did not disappear. It powered civilian aircraft, cargo planes, even racing airplanes. Modified, improved, refined. It lived on, a mechanical survivor of total war. Today, when historians speak of World War II's turning points, they name battles and generals. But buried beneath those moments is something quieter, a decision to build what could not be built, to fly what could not fly, to trust engineers with the fate of nations. America did not just forge an engine. It forged the modern age, and the sound of that engine for roaring radials lifting a silver giant into the sky was the sound of World War II reaching its end. The impossible Machinino one doubted the ambition. They doubted the physics. In the early years of World War II, as Europe burned and Asia collapsed into chaos, the United States faced a problem no nation had ever solved. America didn't just want a bomber. It wanted a weapon that could fly higher than enemy fighters, farther than any interceptor, and carry more destruction than anything ever built. And at the center of that dream was an engine many experts believed could not exist. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was not supposed to be just another airplane. It was designed to fight a war from the edge of the atmosphere. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, radar bombing. It was a flying laboratory, decades ahead of its time. But none of it mattered if the engine failed. The aircraft required power never before sustained in combat aviation to lift its massive frame, cruise thousands of miles, and return home safely. The B-29 needed an engine that could produce extreme horsepower continuously, at altitude, under heat, stress, and vibration that destroyed lesser machines. The engine chosen was the Wright R-3350 duplex cyclone. On paper, it was magnificent. In reality, it was a nightmare. British metallurgists, engineers, and even some American designers examined the specifications and quietly came to the same conclusion. This engine would overheat, fail, and kill crews. Radial engines of this size had limits. Push them harder, and metal warped, bearings seized, cylinders cracked, oil caught fire. And the R-3350 pushed everything past the limit. By 1942, prototypes were failing at alarming rates. Test engines burst into flames. Entire nutshells burned off wings. In one infamous incident, a B-29 crashed into a Seattle neighborhood after an engine fire, killing civilians on the ground. Confidence evaporated. Inside engineering circles, the phrase began to circulate: it cannot be made reliable in time. The British had already decided their bombers would rely on smaller, proven engines, incremental improvement, not revolutionary risk. War was no place for experimental metallurgy. But America was already committed. The B-29 program consumed more money than the Manhattan Project. Entire factories were built from nothing. Aluminum shortages reshaped supply chains. Tens of thousands of workers were trained for tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and still, the engine burned. The problem was heat relentless, murderous heat. At high altitude, air was thin, cooling was poor. The R-3350's tightly packed cylinders trapped temperature. Exhaust valves glowed red. Magnesium components ignited if oil leaked even slightly. Once an engine fire began, it often could not be extinguished. Pilots called it the flying torch, yet canceling the program was unthinkable. America's war planners were already looking beyond Europe. Japan lay across vast oceans, protected by distance. Conventional bombers could not reach it from safe bases. Aircraft carriers were vulnerable. An invasion would cost millions of lives. The B-29 was the only machine capable of bringing the war to Japan's home islands. So the United States made a decision no other nation dared to make. Instead of redesigning the airplane, they would reinvent industrial engineering itself across America. Metallurgists were summoned, men who studied how metals behaved under stress, heat, and time. New alloys were developed almost overnight. Steel compositions were altered. Aluminum blends were rewritten. Cooling fins were reshaped at microscopic levels. Factories stopped being factories. They became research institutions. Every failure became data. Every crash was dissected. Burned engines were shipped back, torn apart, analyzed bolt by bolt. The engine did not forgive mistakes. If tolerances were off by a fraction, the result was catastrophic. If oil flow was uneven, bearings failed. If cooling baffles were misaligned, cylinders overheated. To solve this, America introduced production techniques unheard of in aviation: statistical quality control, precision machining at scale, interchangeable parts that actually fit across thousands of engines. Workers were told something radical for wartime industry: stop the line if something is wrong. Time was the enemy, but so was rushing. Slowly, painfully, the engine began to change. New cooling systems were added, exhaust valves were redesigned, fuel injection improved, fire suppression systems were strengthened. Mechanics were retrained entirely, learning procedures that bordered on ritual. Even pilots had to adapt. Engine management became an art. Throttle settings were precise. Climb rates were conservative. Abuse the engine, and it would kill you. Respect it, and it might bring you home. By late 1943, the B-29 entered combat not because it was perfect, but because the war demanded it. Early missions over China and the Himalayas were brutal. Engines still failed. Aircraft were lost. Crews died without ever seeing the enemy. But something else happened too. When the engines worked, the B-29 flew higher than Japanese fighters could reach. Anti-aircraft guns struggled to hit it. Bomb loads fell from altitudes that redefined strategic bombing. The impossible machine was beginning to work. Behind the scenes, improvements never stopped. Every mission fed back into design. Wartime urgency accelerated innovation at a pace the world had never seen. By 1944, reliability had crossed a threshold. The R-3350 was no longer a liability. It was becoming a weapon. Factories that once doubted now produced engines by the thousands. Young mechanics who had never seen an airplane before the war became masters of machines more complex than anything built in peacetime. America had not simply forged an engine. It had forged a new way of building the future. And the real test was still coming, because soon, these engines would carry something far more dangerous than bombs. They would carry the end of the war.